They said the empire prized harmony, but behind the high red walls of Imperial China, harmony often came at a woman's expense. Imagine a cold stone cell in the old city of Beijing. A single oil lamp flickers, casting shadows on the cracked floor. Shackled to an iron post, a woman kneels, her wrists swollen, her hair shorn, her back striped with welts. She is about to learn what justice means in a world where obedience was expected and silence was survival. These are the punishments no one was supposed to speak about, the tortures reserved for women, carried out in the name of the emperor. These were the punishments that nobody was to talk about, the tortures of women, committed in the emperor's name. Law and order were transcendent in Imperial China. The emperor was the son of heaven, and his subjects, most of all women, were meant to be embodying submission. But when a woman disobeyed that order, in disobedience, adultery, or thievery, the penalty amounted to far, far more than suffering. It was humiliation shaped into a ritual. The penal regime, particularly under Ming and Qing, was a drama of agony. For men, punishment was public, whippings in the bazaar, beheadings before the crowd. For women, the drama was hidden, behind impenetrable prison doors or palace walls. It was not the killing that was so important, but crushing the will before it could arrive. The first of these tortures was deceptively elementary, the cangue, a heavy wooden collar around the neck, sometimes weighing as much as 40 pounds. Female criminals were subjected to wearing it for days or weeks, without eating or sleeping. Some were displayed outside city gateways or in marketplaces, their names marked on the wood. They were spat upon. To noble women or concubines, this was worse than death. Public shame equated to shame forever, not just for her, but also for her family. But inside prison walls, penalties grew malevolent. In one documented case during the late Ming, a courtesan accused of being seditious was subjected to the 5 bamboo punishment. Her interrogators inserted split bamboo rods between her fingers, twisting them until the bones cracked. The executioner then simmered the bamboo in hot oil to prevent wounds from bleeding, so she could be tortured once more another day. According to Qing official records, women prisoners were commonly interrogated with kneeling rods. The suspect would be forced to kneel over razor-sharp, grooved bamboo boards for hours. If she collapsed, she was beaten with a club and pushed to her knees again. The pain was indescribable. Torn apart, bleeding into the wood were the knees by the time. And then the slow strangulation, one which smeared the line between punishment and torture. Death-sentenced women were bound with silk cords, because silk, unlike rope, never scarred the flesh. An executioner would twist the rope behind a person until she fainted. They would occasionally fall behind and allow her to recover before resuming. The imperial court used this as an act of mercy, meaning that it did not condemn the victim to the knife. Mercy, though, in this world, was something else. Infinite suffering. The palace punishments were the most secretive and ghastly of all, handed out to imperial concubines or servants who had committed some offense against a prince or empress. One of them was the red punishment. She was hit repeatedly across her face with a red sandalwood board so that her flesh was torn and her face was reddened. In extreme situations, her tongue was cut out so that she would have no voice to complain against her accusers. There is one case in the Ming veritable records of a maid to the palace who was punished for gossiping about the emperor's favorite concubine. She was the rod and the silence, and was bamboo rodded until she fainted, revived with cold water, and bamboo rodded once again. She lived only 3 days. And then there was the lingqi, the death by 1,000 cuts. This was officially reserved for traitors. But in rare cases, it was done to wives who had killed their husbands or were considered traitorous wives. The trained executioner carved the flesh slowly, arms, breasts, face, while the victim was alive. Witnesses reported that some of the women screamed prayers, others hymned or fell into trance-like calm. For the imperial accountants, it was justice served. For history, it was sadism elevated to ritual. But here's the shock that few are aware of. These horrors weren't random. They were deeply rooted in Confucian philosophy. The body was sacred, a gift to them from their parents, and mutilation was not just a bodily crime, but a moral one. And so when women were punished by flogging, branding, or mutilation, they weren't just being harmed. Metaphorically, they were being erased. The empire wasn't just punishing them for what they had committed, it was erasing them out of the very moral realm. In other words, punishment turned into purification, and that idea justified cruelty. Even the language was whitewashed. Formal reports used euphemisms for torture, like disciplinary inquiry or facilitating confession. It gave moral legitimacy to interrogators. Cries of a woman echoed through corridors, but on parchment, her torment was tidy calligraphy. Justice met in black script. One of the officials of the Qing dynasty, Huang Li, wrote that he pitied the female prisoners since they were less able to bear pain, but he proceeded to order beatings and binding. Another time, a noble woman accused of plotting against the court was spared death. She was jailed instead in a dungeon where she was starved to death. Officials referred to it as an elegant death. As the centuries went by, the empire dissolved, but its old punishments outlived it. Foreign travelers in Beijing prisons in the late 19th century described women in dark cells handcuffed with chains, with their hair shaved off and their faces puffed up from beatings. One British missionary said he heard a chorus of cries each morning when the interrogators commenced their labors. He called it a place where humanity is tested and fails. And yet, these women, unburied, unnamed, missing, left behind something more powerful than their attackers ever imagined. Some smuggled verse out of prison, others spoke prayers that eventually were breathed into children. Confronted with brutality, they held onto shreds of dignity. The real shock is not in the punishments themselves, it's the quiet after. All those centuries, those histories erased, that pain noted as imperial fiat. But each of those dynasties that had been built on terror ultimately fell apart. And each of those falls began the same way, with rumor, with people talking again. So in speaking of justice now, we must ask ourselves, who gets to decide? The silencing empire, or the voices that remain? The Tower of London boasted a rack, France has a guillotine. But Imperial China's jails possess something even more devious, punishment disguised as virtue, pain as philosophy. But still, history remembers not the signers of the warrants, bureaucrats, but the women who endured them. They remind us that institutionalized cruelty does not strengthen an empire, it betrays its weakness. For when power requires blood to legitimate itself, it's already rotten to its core.